Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another episode of OpenShift TV. I'm Chris Short, executive producer of OpenShift TV, and we are having a very special KubeCon office hours. We're going to be talking about some new features in OpenShift 4.6, and I'm going to hand it off to Josh Barkus to kind of give the lay of the land and introduce himself.
Hey, welcome everybody. This is our last office hours accompanying the KubeCon event. As many of you know, we had OpenShift 4.6 come out just before KubeCon. And there's a ton of features in 4.6 integrating cloud native technology from all over the ecosystem. And as such, I invited the OpenShift developer advocacy team here to talk to you about what's in 4.6 and answer your questions about 4.6 and about OpenShift in general, right? These folks are experts in doing stuff on OpenShift, particularly in development targeting OpenShift. So if you have an OpenShift development question, even if it's not about 4.6, feel free to ask it. And with that, I'd like them to go ahead and introduce themselves. So Brian, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Hey everybody, I've been on the developer office hours a few times. You might recognize me. If not, hey, nice to meet you. I'm Brian Tanis. I am part of the OpenShift developer advocates team. I focus on developer advocacy in OpenShift. Basically, what I'm doing is trying to figure out ways to make OpenShift easier for developers and share that experience with you guys. If you have any questions or whatever, please feel free to put them in the chat. I definitely want to stress that this conversation can be dictated by how the chat goes, and we would like it to be. It's office hours. We have, general ideas that we could talk about of the OpenShift 4.6 release, which we'll get to. But please do type those questions out so that we could go ahead and, get sidetracked. That's the whole point. It's office hours. With that, I will pass it off to Jason. Jason's the manager, I guess. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see.
I guess I could start introducing myself as the OpenShift developer advocacy lead. Although honestly, anything I say is just going to echo what you said, but more poorly. So the one thing I'll harp on is let's keep this interactive. If you do have questions in chat, there's things you want us to focus on. This is a very loose script. We have things we certainly are happy and willing to talk about, but this is one of the few avenues in this awful, awful virtual world where we can be back and forth with people. So by all means, take advantage of that. And then last, Cedric, want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Cedric Clyburn. I'm the developer advocate intern, and I've been fortunate enough to be on here before talking about, I think it was Podman or something like that. But I have a series on Red Hat Developer on like getting started with a bunch of different things, Pod Build Man, Odo, just did some stuff with Tecton or pipelines. And it's weird being here because normally I'm the student in office hours, doing my exam right now. So I'm happy to be here on the other side of the spectrum. And yeah, as Jay said, this is a whole interactive thing, so we're happy you're here.
And then we also have Ryan Jarvin in. If you want to do an introduction, you had a talk at KubeCon, and it was pretty awesome, actually, right?
Hey, thanks. Yeah, I did have a talk on the breakout track. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, it's called Admission Control. We Have a Problem. It was kind of really an introduction, not a very advanced course, but feel free to check it out. Just trying to highlight the purpose of the admission control feature on the Kubernetes API. This is kind of the front piece, one of the major pieces of security for validating what's allowed to go into your etcd data store at the core of Kubernetes. It's a feature that we at Red Hat use pretty extensively to try to make multi-tenant safe clusters. I didn't go too much into detail on how Red Hat uses it particularly. I try to keep it kind of generic, But really interesting feature if you're looking at standardizing clusters or trying to lock down certain operational aspects of the cluster. So yeah, definitely hit me up if you have follow-up questions on that topic. I'm Ryan J, most places online. And I think the breakout session is still available. You can also put questions, I think still into the Q&A for the session, possibly until the end of the KubeCon week. And then there's also the KubeCon Slack. I think there's a specific track on extensibility where there's a lot of people kind of keeping the conversation about that topic going. So yeah, a pleasure to be part of and an honor to be part of the KubeCon lineup this week. Really cool. I've had the opportunity once before, but yeah, this was great. I miss the in-person engagement a bit though. So
I was just
looking
about to
forward
say,
to
I
that.
really admire your positivity and all that as I'm sitting here. And actually, I believe this comes from a tweet from Josh of virtual conferences are 80% of the work and 5% of the fun. And like, I'm sitting here, I'm like, I'm kind of at a conference, but this sucks.
Yeah.
So we do have a question in chat already. Josh, do you want to moderate? Or maybe
Yeah.
just
So
talk through it?
Wellren wants to know. Wellren just upgraded to OCP 4.6.3, built a mirror catalog in a restricted network, and the cluster logging operator, which I guess they're trying to install, does not have a 4.6 channel. Only shows 4.5 as the latest. Is that where we are right now with that operator?
So let's take it. I'm going to go the very long way of answering your question. So apologies, but at the same time, hopefully it'll be interesting. So operators have been talked about fairly extensively on Twitch in any of our stuff with Red Hat. One of the things we tend not to focus on a ton in our, not talking about building them, but yes, cheap plug. And that's the funny transition, because one of the things we don't typically talk about is one of the benefits of how it decouples all of these features from the platform itself. So as compared to, I mean, a monolith, to use the general terms, we don't have to ship OpenShift with all of these extra pieces at the same time and then coordinate dev schedules and, oh, sorry, you missed 4.5. That sucks. You're going to be waiting until 4.6. All of these streams are now independent. So these extra things you add on, your serverless, your service mesh, your logging operator, things like that. All of that can have its own independent release cycles. So I mention all of that because the naming on the channels is completely up to the operator maintainer. So they could do, as many have done, 4.3, 4.4, 4.5. They could have used their own versioning scheme. I don't for a fact know that serverless does this, but as an example, they could use 1.10, 1.11, and so on. So is it expected? Possibly is the best I can give you. And I know Brian unmuted, so I'm going to give it to him in a second because he may have a better answer. But the benefit is, what I want to point out is this is not necessarily a bug out the gate. This is not say, oh, since this is locked at 4.5, is this broken or is the operator not updated? It's possible because of this intention of having different streams come out from them that they either didn't need to make changes or they knew it would work, so they weren't in a rush to make changes. And based on their numbering scheme, it looks a little wonky that you're saying, give me the 4.5 stream onto 4.6, but at the end of the day, it's fine. And it's you know, I'm spinning this, even though I don't think it's a bad thing, but I feel like I'm spinning it. But ultimately, this showcases one of the benefits of this operator delivery is that they have their own independent release cycles.
The operator lifecycle manager, you know, will make sure that in some extent that, you know, hey, if the operator can be installed and will work here, like it you know, might handle some of that stuff. Just like what you said, Jay, a lot of the times, like it's very up to the specific operator and the team that's building that operator. Serverless has the same way, I guess, that the monitoring or the logging operator is, OCP-4.5, 4.6, etc. Whenever a new release comes, you know, generally, you know, some are updating immediately right away. Some might do a little more testing and then release. I've seen that happen with maybe like the OpenShift pipelines one. It's also one where the channel you match with the specific version of OpenShift that you have. But on the other hand, there's other operators that are doing it, like OpenShift Service Mesh, and they have a stable channel. Whenever updates come out, Service Mesh 2.0 came out recently, which we'll talk about but Service Mesh 2.0, the operator got updated, right? But that doesn't mean that your service mesh version and what's actually being deployed and stuff got updated. So I know that there were a couple like really concerned people that were out there saying, hey, you know, I want to use Service Mesh 2.0, but not yet. But the operator got updated because there's only a stable channel there. But everything was okay. The operator version of that just got updated, but the specifics are, you know, up to this, you know, the operator and the team that's building that. Whenever the pipelines one came out, say for OpenShift 4.5, when that was released, there was only the OCP-4.4 version of the operator for pipelines available for maybe a week or two. And that generally was okay. Things, you know, there weren't any issues with that. Whenever it got updated, you know, we updated the channel and the operators got updated and things, you know, worked as expected.
Cool. So we have another question from Martin Coe, who does not have any experience with OpenShift, is brand new to OpenShift. And so since Martin Coe's question about what are OpenShift features is very general, I actually wanted to put it to sort of a panel thing and say, hey, so OpenShift is a distribution of Kubernetes. There's a clarification for Martin Coe, right? We are a distribution of Kubernetes. So I'd like actually each of you to give like one major feature that or integration that OpenShift supplies that is not immediately available via upstream Kubernetes if you don't want to put a lot of time into building it yourself. So
Cedric, why don't you go first?
Sure. Honestly, what I've been working with so much recently is the OpenShift pipelines, kind of what Brian just talked about. Being able to have like complete cloud native CI and CD. Like we're doing all this stuff right now in my classes for school, where it's, you know, we're building it on Jenkins and stuff. But it's like I'm getting a whole new perspective of it that, you know, it's completely on the cloud. And so I'm never having to do a lot of manual things that I had to do previously, because pipelines, when you install it, because it's an operator from the operator hub, it's super great, super easy to install. It does everything for me. So that's something that OpenShift only provides, and that I've been having a lot of fun with recently.
I'm playing this game on hard mode. I'm actually going to leave myself till last just as a personal challenge to see if anything gets taken that I was going to say. I want to see how awkward I can make myself and be like, shit, that was my answer.
Okay, then Ryan, you want to go?
All right. Okay. Got my video unfrozen. So I think one of the things I'd like to point out about OpenShift, I was like partially distracted while Cedric was speaking because I was typing into chat, but I put it in chat there as well. One of the things I'm really proud of about OpenShift is it's a CNCF certified distribution of Kubernetes. There's a lot of people who offer Kubernetes in a variety of ways, but I think it's important to make sure you do the effort to kind of make sure you are ensuring kind of the same production level performance characteristics and expectations that you'd get from any CNCF certified kind of professional grade Kubernetes cluster. And so hopefully that's exactly what you're getting from OpenShift is production grade professional Kubernetes cluster. The thing I really like about it is it doesn't just stop at Kubernetes. That's really kind of the baseline for building on up into a whole cloud native ecosystem where you're not necessarily boxed into just Red Hat products or Google products or Microsoft or Amazon or whoever. You have products that are part of the CNCF ecosystem with collaborative maintainership and a lot of buy-in from across the ecosystem, a lot of different corporate interests all collaborating together with a common goal of usability and hopefully productivity for developers. So I'm really proud of the amount of effort that Red Hat does to not just source these upstream projects and package them all up in a cohesive way that people can derive some value from that, but we also contribute to and help maintain these upstream products and projects and kind of keep the whole thing going. And I think that's really important with this cloud native ecosystem, is having a lot of vendors be able to collaborate together. And Red Hat has really, with Operator Hub, in some ways really kind of been leading the way of getting other vendors that are not OS providers or Kubernetes maintainers to jump into the game with operators and other features to kind of extend the experience. So you can have something like an AWS, Amazon cloud, anywhere that you need to do work, right? You can take your cloud and bring it to work instead of trying to take your work to the cloud. And that's really, really impressive.
I'll add real quick to that. This isn't my point, but I'll add real quick to that is with OpenShift, it doesn't matter if we're using AWS, GCP, on-premise, it runs everywhere and it runs the same. And that's a really big deal. And it's not just it runs on AWS or it runs on GCP. There are operators that are out there that work with OpenShift and are supported with OpenShift that allows us to take AWS resources and use them insanely easily within OpenShift. And that really goes to like my point of developer first, right? We really, really strongly have been pushing the developer first centric things with more recent versions of OpenShift. The developer console, the way that I'll talk to friends that don't work on Kubernetes. They develop applications, they do front end development, they do back end development. The number one question that I get is, if they're not familiar, Kubernetes seems really difficult. There's a lot of things going on. How do I just deploy an application? How do I get something going? And then where do I go from there? OpenShift now with OpenShift 4.6 guides you along the way. It really does. You log in the first time and there's a guided tour that walks you through. This is what the developer console is. This is how you see all the things deployed. This is how you deploy an app. It makes it really simple. And because of the ability to have operators and extend that, and that's very solidly built into OpenShift, with the way that we've been gathering how the operators work and all this, the way that the developer console and the administrator console works, right? It makes it easy so that we can extend that functionality and use additional services, right? Maybe I don't necessarily care about manually pulling triggers, right? I want my application to scale. All I got to do is install the OpenShift serverless operator, like seriously, and then deploy it as that application as serverless. That application instantly scales. I don't need to know YAML, right? I could deploy my application via the web console in OpenShift, which is award-winning, as well as within a CLI tool. There's KN, right? It's Knative, but we do things to make it more OpenShift centric. Just like Ryan mentioned, OpenShift is multi-tenant, right? I don't have to have separate clusters for separate things. We can have multiple users use the same thing in an easy to use manner. And it really is easy to use. It really is. That's really a really important aspect of what we've been trying to do with this developer console and how things work with OpenShift. One of the other things too is Odo, for example, right? We have tooling that make it so that Kubernetes and OpenShift don't necessarily get in my way when I'm trying to develop applications. If I'm changing code, I could use Odo to watch the changes and make sure that they're synchronized up on OpenShift and things work, the way that they should, and it's instantly refreshed, right? That's pretty cool. And OpenShift provides those sets of features to really not get in my way. And that's the reason why I like OpenShift.
Okay, so I'm safe. You didn't take my answer. And I have seen other questions coming in. I think, so this started out as OpenShift is enterprise Kubernetes. Cool. Glad we got that messaging across. So what does OpenShift add on top of it? When 4.0 came out, the first time I saw the installer and the idea of, hey, here's some credentials to a cloud, here's the installer, go. And all of a sudden, I had a full OpenShift install. 3 masters, 3 worker nodes, everything configured, everything ran. I was like, dude, that is really cool. That I got 6 VMs without having to manually create it. Like, it handled all of that. What really gets cool is the fact that OpenShift continues to manage the nodes after that. So I have a demo, and you can just play around with this on your own, where you can set up an autoscaler, and you can tell OpenShift, like, hey, within these constraints, if you need more nodes, I'm going to give you permission to go off and create your own. And the first time you see that, the first time you throw a whole bunch of workloads at it after configuring this, and you're watching the list of machines inside of OpenShift, and all of a sudden there's now 4 instead of 3. And you sit back for about a minute or two, and all of a sudden that machine is fielding worker nodes. You're like, that is really cool. I tend to, in my talks and stuff, reference to the 2 a.m. text message and that kind of stuff. That is very cliche. It's certainly not anything I came up with, but the idea of, oh, service is down, we need to get an ops person in here, coffee them up so they understand what's going on, have them fix it. Auto healing or machine healing in general has always been something particularly interesting to me. And seeing it in action on top of everything Kube gets, and just being like, yeah, go scale your stuff out if you need to have more capacity. And just having it all magically happen is really, really cool. So above and beyond what Kubernetes provides, that's one of the cooler features, in my opinion, in OpenShift.
And that auto scaling ability is literally a right click on the developer console now, create a horizontal pod auto scaler, and I set what my limits, just like what you said, in a form. I don't deal with YAML. I don't deal with any of that complexity. I right clicked from the web. I can, right? If we want to do that, we can do that. But it is very simple if we want to use it that way, and it works. There's no issues using it that way either. It's perfect.
One of the extra, what Jay pointed a little bit about multi-tenancy earlier. And one of the other kind of aspects of OpenShift that I really appreciate is, that the autoscaler is potentially right click, one button, very easy to set up. But each of these control interfaces can be exposed to the appropriate members of your team, or hidden if it's not your scope of responsibility, right? And I think for other folks, Kubernetes is kind of like a generic operating system or middleware for stacking a lot of other things on, but it's not really intended to be a full, complete, like, distributed platform with multiple users. And OpenShift really kind of hits that full vision of a multi-user distributed platform that you can run if you need to. Also, for developers, almost all of that can be hidden. And so you have the production grade control interface into getting the right quality of feedback. So you don't have any surprises when you go to promote your code, but without the added complication if it's outside of your scope of responsibility. So there's a lot of opportunity for people to get involved in just the right layer from a security and administrative control perspective. And that's not always very clearly outlined upstream in the rest of the Kubernetes space. That's a lot of DIY work to secure your own clusters. And so a lot of folks are like, well, everyone gets their own dev cluster. That's our security model, is one cluster per user. And that's one way of kind of firewalling off my development code. But when my development code moves up a stage and my team members' code moves up a stage, and all of a sudden we have a mixed code environment in production, if you haven't been planning that through from a security perspective from the start, you're going to experience some pain somewhere, right? And I'd like to have everything properly tied up and configured right during my development phase whenever possible. So that's a huge benefit from the OpenShift perspective, to have everything buttoned up and ready to go.
I can vouch for that. Ryan's code sucks. So the idea of having it in a multi-tenant world where I'm worried it's going to break my stuff is very disconcerting.
You always got to watch out for my code.
So-
You have to always beware.
So speaking of security, we actually have Texiera.
Okay.
Yeah, has a question about automatically updating containerized applications where his security scanner finds vulnerabilities. Jason, you want to take that?
Yeah, so again, I'm going to go the long way to your answer, and I'm going to answer the question you didn't ask. But the way, and I don't know who can see what based on how we're streaming this, but there was a little bit going back and forth in chat. And it evolved down to, let's say, hypothetically, there's a bug in curl, security issue in curl, that's detected by whomever's security software, and we need to fix it. And one of the things that Josh and I were asking in chat was curl running inside a container, or is curl running on the OpenShift node? Now, the answer was container, so I will answer that, I promise. But what if it was running on the node? And this ties into my previous point about the machine scaling. If you're new to OpenShift 4, coming from a 3 background, but even if you're not, this is going to sound a little bizarre. OpenShift runs on top of Red Hat, oh my God, CoreOS. I almost said CentOS. I'm like, no, it's not that. On top of Red Hat CoreOS. It is an immutable operating system geared specifically toward hosting containers. Immutable is the important part there. We're trying to be perfectly blunt, get away from people going into the node with SSH and then changing a whole bunch of stuff. So all of that configuration is handled through OpenShift and Kubernetes APIs and custom resources that let us use those APIs. I mentioned that in the context of the machine stuff that I talked about earlier, because that's how we allow that to happen. The fact that we have the configuration sitting inside of OpenShift, so it knows how to provision a new instance. And then the fact that we have this immutable operating system, so we're not worried about a whole bunch of churn or variability in those. And it's easy for us to manage the nodes if they're that, I hate using this analogy, but if they're that much cattle instead of pets, we can just toss them away and grab a new one. Now, that whole diatribe was to mention that if your curl update was on the nodes, it would come down to a new release of CentOS that would be pushed out with this new fix. We would bounce the work. I did it, didn't I? Of CoreOS. Thank you, Brian. At least I didn't say so it's a new version of Ubuntu that comes out that OpenShift gets installed on top of. I'm in the ballpark at least. So it's a new
Only
version
in my
of,
containers.
That's right. It's a new version of CoreOS that comes out that we replace in the worker node. It wouldn't be something where you're running DNF update on the node. Now, that's not what you asked me. You asked for inside of a container. Because, okay, sorry, I have vulnerabilities and I want to fix them without updating the OpenShift version. So yeah, we're dialing in this question to if I have particular container vulnerabilities. And that's one of the huge benefits of using containers, is that you can just update those specific workloads instead of updating the entire cluster that's running it. But again, containers are themselves immutable. So you're not sure you technically have the option of going into the container and deploying the new fix. The convention, though, is again back to the pets and cattle thing. Your containers are typically meant to be lightweight and volatile. So you patch this version of curl, you push out a new image, and then you replace your containers with that new image. Now, that is a spectacularly dumbed down view of all of the different variables that go into that. But at the end of the day, that's essentially what happens. Now, how do you do that with zero downtime? You can if you were just using containers on your own, but that's where an orchestration engine really gives you power. And something like OpenShift, where I can say, do a rolling deployment. And out of these 10 pods, I want you to update 5, send traffic over to the new ones, and then update the other 5. So we don't get any kind of downtime. And this all the way pays back to, if he's still here, the question earlier about what's OpenShift used for. That's another one of those benefits, is that you can manage this uptime with really high reliability, because container changes and container removals and everything like that don't affect each other, don't affect the underlying platform. So the long answer is you update the container image and then you push it out. Now, you're talking about security in particular. That's something you'd want to tie into your pipeline. So in some capacity, your pipeline detects it and either fixes it before the image goes out, or you have an automated process that pushes the image out for you. And then we could spend the next 2 hours talking about all the different hypotheticals around it. But I wanted to at least just cover the general ballpark, that you fix that in the container. You don't do that by fixing the container per se, as you do building a new image or an updated image with the fix, and then getting OpenShift to create new containers with that fix. Thank you.
There's the container security operator that gives you some of the details of, hey, that curl version there's a problem, and you could see that issue in the OpenShift console with the container security operator that gets that data from a bunch of different sources. Quay could be, or Quay and Claire could be one. It gets from a bunch of different things. I'll paste that in the chat, but you could automate and act upon that using some kind of pipeline, just like Jay said, right? So you could build this stuff together, depending on what your needs are. And because of containers, you don't need to worry on the base version of Python that's installed in Core OS. The container that you have has, what you're using. So that's a very big benefit of containers in general.
One last thing I want to drop in on this. Sorry, Ryan, I felt like I cut you off, but there was something mentioned in chat about the image change trigger. And that's a very solid way of doing it, that you define your deployment, your internal OpenShift resource that says, this is the application I want. And you define it to keep an eye on the image stream. And once a new one becomes available, the next version, it's going to automatically deploy that for you. And again, taking that 2 a.m. text message out of it, if we can automate that process of, we've detected a security vulnerability in our scanning software, we've tied that into our pipeline to build a new image, and then OpenShift picks up and says, hey, there's a new image in the new image in this stream. My deployment is focused on this particular stream. Let me redeploy it. Ryan, did I step on your answer? Are you going to say the same thing?
You stole my answer. That's kind of what I was going to say. Yeah, the thanks to Kubified and chat with the image change trigger tip. That's exactly what I set that bit to true in the YAML in order to get basically continuous delivery anytime a new image arrives in our registry, and that trigger is going to fire off anytime a build finishes. So I can essentially have a continuous build tied to a continuous deploy if I hook up webhooks from GitHub or really any other source into this type of system. You might not want continuous delivery into your production cluster, depending, but this is all configurable per instance, and for development purposes, yeah, I'd probably continuously deliver. So yeah, lots of options, all customizable to what suits your purposes.
Okay.
The important thing to remember, though, is no matter what Ryan says, I answered that one first.
So we have a bunch more questions queued up. I actually have one from Slack, which is, what's the relationship between OKD and OpenShift? And particularly, when is OKD 4.6 expected out?
Ryan, I'm gonna let you handle that one since I feel bad I stepped on you last time.
Oh man, thank you. Yeah, that's a great question on OKD 4.6. I know they're kind of on like a rolling deal. There was a official Birds of a Feather session this morning that I tweeted about, but wasn't able to physically attend. So I'm not sure if there's video or any kind of recap from that. Josh, you aware of any details from that Birds of a Feather session?
Yeah, there should be a video. I mean, it was done through KubeCon.
Okay.
And so there should be a video online soon.
Great. Yeah, that's definitely one place to check for a recent gathering of experts from that specific community. You can also keep an eye on the OpenShift blog. We usually make a decent number of announcements through there. One last source I can give you for information, like where to go for information on this topic. I know Diane Mueller, who runs the OpenShift Commons organization. She frequently has, I remember a month or two ago, she had an OKD Install Fest day. And I know we have recorded video on how to do an OKD based install onto Amazon, onto OpenStack, on like pick your cloud, even bare metal. I'm pretty sure we have a video based kind of walkthrough of how to set up every single one. And it's probably on the 4.5 series, but you might be able to follow along with those videos, change a couple numbers and see if your curl query works with a 4.6 instead of a 4.5. I'm not sure how soon that'll be published, but a lot of the workflow on how to set it up on any given cloud is going to be pretty similar from 4.5 to 4.6. So a lot of that instruction should still be valid.
Okay.
Did I answer that question appropriately? Did I get all of it?
What
Yeah,
is
I think
OKD
so.
comparison to OpenShift though?
Yeah. Okay. So OKD is more kind of OpenShift is the productized for sale version of OKD. Ideally, I don't audit the code on both of these systems, but ideally these are almost zero difference between OKD and OpenShift container platform. So those would be kind of your two choices. They're basically identical. I think OKD is probably not going to have 10 years of product support behind, or ability for us to do kind of back patching. You're hopefully always riding on that edge version because that's where the development is happening. And if you have an OKD cluster that's a year or two old, it might not be functioning nearly as well as an OCP production cluster that has Red Hat trying to do backports and patching for it.
I think that answers that. Speaking of the cutting edge, Daniel is trying to get OpenShift, I guess, running on Hyper-V, and has not had a lot of luck.
I actually think this question was code ready container specific.
Oh, okay.
Yes, code CRC version 4.
Got it. That's what he means by CRC. Okay.
Yeah. Brian, you're a little more dialed into that than I am. I don't know if you've ever played with it in that particular configuration.
Yeah. So with code ready containers, what that is a way to run a single node virtual machine version of OpenShift, full on OpenShift. You get all the operators, all the things that are there. You have all that on your laptop, workstation, what have you. It runs in Linux, it runs on Mac OS X, it runs in Windows. There's some requirements. With Windows, you need to make sure that you're updated to, it needs to be first on Windows 10. It needs to be on a specific build or higher. Definitely, I will make sure that we link the documentation in the chat so that you could get those details of which specific one. But I think it's been like maybe the past year update of Windows 10. So you probably are updated there. One of the things that you have to do is be able to have Hyper-V. So you have to have Windows 10, professional or what have you. You need to run so assuming all those requirements are met and things are okay, You then need to make sure that you run the CRC setup command, and you have to have administrator rights on your machine. So if you're running this on a workstation where you don't necessarily have those admin rights on that machine, you're going to have to probably work with your IT team to be able to, get that maybe put into the image or get some kind of exception so that they could do that. But that is a requirement to be able to manage the Hyper-V VM stuff and the networking that CRC requires, so that you could be able to communicate with it via, just CRC, the DNS set that it gives you when you run that command. So I would imagine most of the problems that I've seen on Windows are generally going to be because of updated for a specific version. But like I said, that's been like a year from now or a year ago. I don't think that's a problem anymore, but it might be. And then the second one is generally administrator rights. Maybe it isn't. If it isn't, we definitely, want to help you and make sure that you get this up and running. So please make sure that you let us know.
Cool. Thank you. So Christoph wants to know why installing 4.6 takes so long. Why it doesn't do more parallel install across his nodes. Who wants to take this?
Does he need faster nodes?
Ultimately, I think none of us are deep enough in the weeds to really be able to answer that. I know that there's obviously the time to establish the nodes. There's the time to set up the variety of HA situations. I don't know. I don't even have visibility into the details of, do all 6 start setting up at the same time? Do we do some workers and some masters at the same time? Apologies. I think I kind of speak for all of us when I say that as advocates, we've been much more on the developer experience once it's upside of things without ever having to really look that closely at the installer. So
what style of install was this?
Yeah, that's a very valid point. Is this on AWS? You might be hitting some rate limits. It might take a little bit on your particular account. Is this on premise? If that's the case, like, it's got to go and load the OS. Like, it's got to do that regardless, right? How long is too long, I guess, is the question.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different things that are going on, right?
Yeah. So Christoph, feel free to ask a follow-up question with some of that information.
I know one of the things we've changed through as we've gone into 4.6 with the 3 series, you had to do a lot of pre-provision planning. You needed to know how many nodes you wanted in your cluster. Not that you couldn't scale that after the fact, but there was a lot more work to do some prep before your cluster got set up. And then the cluster setup process would often be doing a whole lot of work and would take a long time as well. With some of the later versions, the installer is quite a bit more streamlined. We kind of set up a minimal cluster, and then within the cluster, depending on which cloud you're on, there's control interfaces that you can use within the admin dashboard to add more nodes. And then that'll call out to AWS, provision more nodes, set them all up. So you might be able to shift some of the work to kind of post install, depending on, or at least compared to our older versions of OpenShift. We've definitely done some effort to try to streamline the install and move as much as possible into a post-install configuration state. Hopefully that's helpful.
Cool, thanks. Ask follow-up questions if it wasn't what you were actually looking for. In the meantime, Adila is concerned about a different installation issue, which is they want to try out 4.6 at a minimum cost. What Adila was asking is whether it's possible to set up just a 2-node cluster in AWS. I think there might be some other options for trying it out at minimal cost, though.
My understanding, and I may set myself up to be told you're wrong on this, but there's no way to configure that at install, but you can scale it down after the fact. Actually, as I say that, I might actually be lying already, because PDS by default will generate us smaller nodes where they've got it set up with a single master, single worker, or at least 3 masters, 1 worker. Is that all for? I know I can say with confidence that originally out the gate with the 4.1 release, back when I was more heavily installing OpenShift, that was the case, that it was you start out with the 6 and then you scale it down. Similar to what I was saying earlier about how you work with the machines through it.
We call it compact clusters. I have a bare metal version of that running. It's 3 master / workers. Basically, when you create OpenShift, look in the documentation for compact clusters. That's been a tech preview feature in OpenShift 4 series for a while. It might be GA now. If not, it's going to be GA really soon. I'm not specifically sure, but it's available. It runs. But that is one way. If you're just trying to try OpenShift 4.6 to see the new features, learn.openshift.com is a nice website that you could get a 1-hour ephemeral cluster. You could refresh the browser and keep resetting that and try it out. 4.6 is not in that yet, but we're working really hard. It should be there next week, hopefully, maybe Thanksgiving, maybe the week after. We'll see how that works out, but that's one way.
Hopefully it'll be an early holiday present for folks that are interested. Should get it done before the new year, at least.
Okay. JB Dade says that they're having to wait to upgrade from 4.5.18 to 4.6. I'm not clear on why they have to wait to upgrade. Maybe you guys know.
I am guessing, and this is just making a guess, but my assumption is he's probably logging into the cluster administrator dashboard, and there's some options in there for selecting which channel and which update stream. vSphere.
Let me interrupt you. He's vSphere.
Ah, okay. So this may be specific to vSphere, but generally there's controls within the dashboard where you just pick which number you want and it'll start trying to roll to the next version, at least for point releases. So within the 4.5 release, you should keep being able to roll forward. At some point, there may be a point where 4.5 something, some minor release, may include information about how to roll forward to 4.6. It looks like whatever minor that we have doesn't currently include that information about how to roll forward a whole major version to 4.6. But hopefully that'll be coming in at some point into the dashboard in there. That's part of the idea with OpenShift, is to be able to provide in-place upgrades so that you don't have to stand up an additional 4.6 cluster on the side and then migrate workloads from your 4.5 to your 4.6. That's the long way of going about it. There may be 4.6 install options for vSphere before there are upgrade options from 4.5 to 4.6.
Could be, I don't know. I'm not saying this is it. Could be an issue with that upgrade that they're working and making sure that it's good before it gets pushed out to that stable channel, right?
Okay. Well, we're getting some follow-up information, but before we do that, I actually have one question that I wanted to ask each of you, which is, what 4.6 features that were not part of the press releases, like, sort of minor features or offbeat features that came out in 4.6, do you personally really like? Like, they're super useful to you, you think they're really interesting or really creative solutions to something, that weren't like the big banner features, but are nevertheless going to be super useful?
That's a good question. I've been mostly focused on kind of the larger issues. I'm not sure how aware folks are in this audience of all the top issues in 4.6 to begin with. I'll kind of cheat on this one. This is a more of a larger issue, but is probably my favorite. I don't know if it's the largest issue from 4.6, probably not. But there's something Brian mentioned earlier, the quick start functionality, being able that for developers, I think, or for onboarding a team, being able to put in specific information about next steps in order to, standardize your onboarding experience. If you want folks to use a certain database or certain way of interfacing with Kubernetes, you can make that exceedingly clear and have that available right in the experience rather than out in a separate set of documentation that's getting out of date. And, so that's nice to have it built right into the platform. I know we have a blog post about that specific feature for folks that want more information. I'll paste it into chat.
Yeah, this time you did steal mine because it's not the greatest answer for necessarily the audience, but from our perspective as developer advocates and this idea of getting people onboarded with content. We're the team who maintains learn.openshift.com with a lot of self-service tutorials, and we are absolutely just looking at this prospect of embedding that stuff inside of OpenShift and like really stupidly excited about it. So unfortunately, that's where my head went to.
Well, Cedric, do you have a different one?
Unfortunately, I don't have anything specifically for the 4.6 release, as I've been doing like a lot of Odo work and presentations during the whole time that they've been working on 4.6. But I'll pass it to Brian.
I mean, the new version of Odo came out. The new version of pipelines came out. Those have features that are awesome that you've been working on. So
yeah, I mean, like pick a pipeline feature that maybe has not gotten a lot of attention, but you think people are going to find super useful, even though they haven't looked at it yet.
Yeah, why is it valuable?
Yeah. Well, could I pick something from Odo?
Sure.
Awesome. Okay, so Odo 2.0 is absolutely crazy phenomenal because we finally have support for Kubernetes now instead of just OpenShift. And actually, it's crazy. I had a presentation fell on me live, so I had a great experience from that. But there's this thing called dev files, which you're starting to see in Odo, but also in CRC, which is super interesting, kind of like a portable development environment that you can essentially use anywhere you want on whatever cluster you want, Kubernetes or OpenShift. So it's super interesting to look into. They're pretty new, but you're seeing it already on code-ready containers and also on dev files. Also on Odo. So that's what I'm really interested in right now.
For me, I probably would say that the biggest thing is the general usability updates. Like I said, I like to focus on things that make my life easier. And the general usability updates in the topology view and the developer console are really a big deal to me. If I'm working on something, before you couldn't change which columns you see in an administrator view, right? If I want to see something specific, I might have to go drill in and look at the pod and look at what's actually going on. With OpenShift 4.6, we now have the ability to go and customize the columns that are there. And it keeps a cookie. So I could see, if I go back to it later, it didn't forget where I was, right? So if I go drill into something, I could go back, it'll still be there. So that was a really big deal for me. The other thing is really around all the services that are there, right? So serverless eventing, that's a really big thing that we talked about, but really that's one of my, the biggest things that I think is really important. It's basically the way that we could integrate containers and things with other sets of software, right? Maybe Slack messages or, or maybe a cron task if we want to do something simple. We could pass messages using cloud events. We talked about it at KubeCon. I heard that at the keynote. Cloud events are awesome. And serverless eventing allows us to consume some of those things so that what I'm working on could be able to react to stuff. I came from mobile app development before, working on Kubernetes. And cloud to device messaging is one of the biggest things that I think is ultra interesting, because it allows you to connect your app on users' devices to a message that came in, right? We could do those types of things now with serverless eventing, and it's generally available because it's not tech preview. It's there, right? It's stable. We're supporting it, and that's a really big aspect.
Brian, apologies that I missed the beginning part of that because I was answering a question. Did you talk about just the breadcrumbs? Or did you talk about favorites?
So there's a couple of things. So in the administrator view, if I go and look at, say, like the list of pods or a list of really anything, I think that list view in the administrator thing, I could go and modify the columns that I see so that like I could drill into the details that I want to see for everything. I have a nice good overview, but there's also application monitoring that I get by, default, right? I could go and also see that, the CPU usage for this particular set of deployments or this particular pod, has been ramping up, or I could have visibility into what's going on. And that's all available now in the developer console as of OpenShift 4.6. So it makes my life easier to monitor and keep track of what's going on, right? But I also have the ability to drill into things a lot easier. So I don't have to, waste cycles to see the details of each specific thing. I could see that stuff, as needed.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
I think
my
that
answer to Josh's hidden feature is the favorites menu in the left. Brian, I hope I didn't step on you again for the favorites thing.
no, go for it.
All right, cool. I don't look at our docs regularly, so I don't know how well this is covered. But if you're not aware, on the left side menu, the bottom section of them is customizable. So as you go through different pages, you can click add this to my favorites, and it's pre-populated with a few, and it's very easy to overlook and think, oh, they added some new stuff to that part of the menu, but that's customizable. So the things you regularly find yourself doing, which is a godsend for demos, so I can easily get to the parts I'm showing. But if you're frequently accessing certain areas, you can add it to that side. So that's my hidden little 4.6 feature.
We have
to finally answer Josh's question.
We have a challenge for customizing the console, and I will put some of that details in there. It closes out in, I think, 9 days.
I just posted a link. Yeah,
yeah.
That's another really kind of like, we haven't talked about that as much, but you can theoretically, you don't like the OpenShift logo, put your corporate logo there, dress it up. You can kind of get OpenShift as kind of a white label experience and re-offer it to your engineering team and have it look however your corporate overlords expect you to have it look. It can be accomplished, right? So the console customization, if you have great ideas on how you would like to customize the console, whoops, my video froze up. We're running a contest right now. We would love to have you share your customizations if you're willing to, and there's a link to the blog post in chat there. One last feature that I'm not entirely sure if this is tied to 4.6. This might have been introduced partially in 4.5, but this is totally one of my favorites. There's a new support for operators to provide their own kind of web-based control interfaces. This is relatively new. I don't know how many other Kubernetes distributions support this very well, because not all Kubernetes distributions have CRDs and operators as like a top level concept and a top level resource type. Not all of them are built around those type of concepts. So the operator hub within OpenShift doesn't just allow you to have a nice interface for administrators to enable selected features, but also the users of those features can interact with a specialized control interface that's kind of offered by the author of the operator. So if there's something that is I don't know. You don't have to deal with YAML. You can have a nicer control interface that is more on par with what you might see in AWS or something for managing your data stores. So that's a really nice feature that a lot of operators are starting to develop.
Nice. Well, and with that, we are actually at time. This is the end of the office hour. So if somebody could actually, so a couple of things. I posted a link for everybody who asked a question today. I posted a link for where they can request an OpenShift t-shirt, which we will mail out if you live in a country that we can ship to, which is unfortunately not all of them. And the other thing is if somebody can actually follow up with Daniel in chat and give him a place to take next steps in troubleshooting his Hyper-V install, so he knows where to go. And with that, thank you, panel, for supplying so much varied information about what's going on with OpenShift and how to make best use of it. And thank you to all of the attendees. And everybody enjoy the end of KubeCon. And thanks for joining us.
And good vibes that next time we do this at KubeCon, we'll be live in person.
Yeah.
Keep telling
Hey, thanks
myself
for
that.
hosting, Josh. Great
Yes,
to
thank
have you
very
here.
much,
Yes,
Josh.
thank you guys.
Yeah. See y'all next time.
Take care.